The cold Wyoming wind howled like a wounded animal as Tabitha Lawson clutched her infant daughter tighter to her chest, desperately seeking warmth in the dilapidated barn where she had taken refuge. The journey west had cost her everything: her husband, her home, and nearly her will to live, but the tiny bundle in her arms was reason enough to keep fighting. Wyoming Territory, 1868. Tabitha hadn't intended to trespass. After her wagon broke down 5 miles back and night began to fall, the abandoned-looking homestead had seemed like Providence. The main house was locked tight, but the barn door had swung open at her touch, revealing stacks of hay and shelter from the increasingly violent spring storm. She had settled herself, and 6-month-old Temperance in the cleanest corner, praying the owners wouldn't return before dawn. That prayer went unanswered when the barn door crashed open near midnight, startling both mother and child awake. Temperance began to wail as a tall figure silhouetted against the faint moonlight stepped inside, a rifle held steady in his hands. "Who's there?" The man's voice was deep and rough with suspicion. "Show yourself." Tabitha rose shakily to her feet, one hand cradling Temperance against her shoulder, the other raised in surrender. "Please, sir," she called over her daughter's cries. "We mean no harm. My baby and I just needed shelter from the storm." The figure moved closer, and Tabitha could finally make out his features in the dim light. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that suggested he'd spent most of his life outdoors. His dark beard was neatly trimmed, and beneath the brim of his hat she caught the gleam of assessing eyes. "Hush now," he said, lowering his rifle and setting it against a nearby stall. "No need to frighten the little one more than she already is." He struck a match and lit a lantern hanging from a beam, casting the barn in a warm golden glow in the improved light. Tabitha could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, and his expression, while cautious, held no malice. He wore the practical clothing of a working rancher, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. "Quinn Harrington," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "This is my property you're sheltering on." "Tabitha Lawson," she replied, bobbing a small curtsy out of habit while still trying to soothe Temperance. "And this is my daughter, Temperance. I apologize for trespassing, Mr. Harrington. Our wagon lost a wheel several miles back, and with the storm coming—" She trailed off, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after weeks on the trail. Quinn studied her for a long moment, his eyes taking in her threadbare dress, the mended shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and the thin blanket protecting the baby. His gaze softened. "Where's your husband, Mrs. Lawson?" Tabitha swallowed hard. "Cholera. Outside of Independence almost 2 months ago." Quinn's expression shifted, something like respect mingling with sympathy. "You've been traveling alone, with an infant." "We were bound for Oregon. My cousin has a farm there." Tabitha attempted to maintain her dignity despite her circumstances. "We'll be gone at first light, I promise." Quinn Harrington removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair. "No one should be out in this weather, especially not a woman and child." He gestured toward the farmhouse. "Come along to the house." Tabitha hesitated. "I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition if I'm offering," Quinn interrupted. "Besides, that storm's only getting worse." As if to emphasize his point, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the barn, causing Temperance to burst into fresh tears. Quinn moved to the barn door and pushed it open, revealing sheets of rain illuminated by flashes of lightning. "Trust me, Mrs. Lawson. You don't want to spend the night in here." Gathering her meager belongings, a small carpet bag, and the blanket, Tabitha followed Quinn across the muddy yard to the main house, hunching over Temperance to shield her from the rain. The small, sturdy cabin was simply furnished but clean and warm, with a fire burning in the stone hearth. "It's not much," Quinn said, suddenly seeming self-conscious as he lit additional lamps, "but it's dry and warm." "It's lovely," Tabitha replied sincerely, for after weeks of sleeping under a wagon or in the open air, the simple cabin seemed like a palace. Quinn moved to the fireplace, adding another log. "Are you hungry? I've got some stew left from supper." Tabitha's stomach growled embarrassingly in response, and she blushed. "That would be very kind, thank you." While Quinn busied himself at the small stove, reheating the stew, Tabitha took the opportunity to look around. The cabin consisted of one large room with a curtained-off area she presumed was a bedroom. A rough-hewn table with 4 chairs dominated the center, while a small settee faced the fireplace. Everything was neat and orderly, though distinctly masculine in character. "You live here alone?" she asked, gently rocking Temperance, who had finally begun to quiet. Quinn nodded without turning around. "Just me for the past 3 years. Got the place cheap from a family heading back east. Didn't have the stomach for frontier life." He ladled stew into a bowl and placed it on the table. "Please sit." Tabitha hesitated, looking down at Temperance. Quinn seemed to understand her dilemma and approached with his arms outstretched. "May I hold her while you eat? I have nieces back in Missouri. I'm not completely useless with little ones." Surprised, Tabitha carefully transferred her daughter to Quinn's arms. His large, calloused hands cradled Temperance with unexpected gentleness, and the baby stared up at him with wide, curious eyes before breaking into a gummy smile. "Well now," Quinn said softly, his face transforming with a smile of his own. "Aren't you a friendly little lady?" Tabitha watched in amazement as her normally shy daughter gurgled happily in the stranger's arms. Sensing her stare, Quinn glanced up, a hint of color rising to his tan cheeks. "Your food's getting cold, Mrs. Lawson." The stew was simple but delicious chunks of beef, potatoes, and carrots in a rich broth, and Tabitha realized just how hungry she'd been. She finished the entire bowl before remembering her manners. "This is wonderful," she said. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Harrington." "Quinn," he corrected. "Mr. Harrington was my father." "Quinn," she repeated, testing the name. "Then you must call me Tabitha." Temperance began to fuss, and Tabitha recognized the hunger cry. "I should feed her," she said, rising to take the baby back. Quinn cleared his throat awkwardly. "Of course. You can use the bedroom for privacy." He gestured to the curtained area. "Actually, you and the little one should take the bed tonight. I'll make up a pallet here by the fire." Tabitha shook her head firmly. "I couldn't possibly displace you from your own bed. We've already imposed enough." "The floor is fine for us. She was sleeping in the barn with her baby," Quinn interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "The cowboy said you take the bed, I'll take the floor. End of discussion." His stern expression softened into a slight smile. "Please, Tabitha. Let me do this one small thing." Something in his eyes and earnestness, a fundamental decency, made it impossible for Tabitha to refuse. She nodded. "Thank you." Quinn showed her to the bedroom, which contained a sturdy bed with a patchwork quilt, a small chest of drawers, and a washstand. "There's fresh water in the pitcher," he said. "Take your time. I'll be outside seeing to the animals." When he had gone, Tabitha settled on the edge of the bed to feed Temperance. The sheets smelled of soap and sunshine, and the mattress was softer than anything she'd slept on in months. Gratitude and bone-deep weariness washed over her in equal measure, and she found herself blinking back tears. "What do you think of our good Samaritan, Temperance?" she whispered to her nursing daughter. "He's certainly not what I expected to find in Wyoming territory." Later, after Quinn had returned and fashioned himself a makeshift bed on the floor near the hearth, Tabitha lay awake listening to the storm rage outside while her daughter slept peacefully beside her. She could hear Quinn's deep, even breathing from the other room, and found herself wondering about the man who had shown such unexpected kindness to strangers. He was nothing like her late husband, James. Where James had been slight and scholarly, Quinn Harrington was all muscle and practical capability. James had been a dreamer, convincing her to sell their small Illinois home to pursue land and opportunity in Oregon. Quinn struck her as a man firmly rooted in reality. Sleep claimed her while she was still pondering the cowboy's weathered face and surprisingly gentle hands. Tabitha woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the unfamiliar sound of cookware clanking. For a moment, she was disoriented, until memories of the previous night flooded back. Temperance was already awake beside her, contentedly chewing on her own fist. "Good morning, sweet girl," Tabitha whispered, leaning down to kiss her daughter's forehead. "Shall we see what our host is up to?" After making herself as presentable as possible with her limited resources, Tabitha emerged from the bedroom with Temperance on her hip. Quinn stood at the stove, his back to her, flipping something in a cast-iron skillet. "Good morning," she said. Quinn turned, and Tabitha was struck anew by his rugged handsomeness in the morning light. His dark hair was damp, as if he'd recently washed and he'd shaved, revealing a strong jawline previously hidden by his beard. "Morning," he replied with a nod. "Hope you slept well. Coffee's hot and breakfast is nearly ready." "Better than I have in months," Tabitha admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." Quinn waved away her thanks, seeming almost embarrassed. "Least I could do. Weather's cleared up nice, though. Should be good traveling today." A strange pang of disappointment shot through Tabitha at the reminder that she would be leaving soon. "Yes, I suppose we should get on our way after breakfast. I need to see about repairing our wagon." Quinn set a plate of hot cakes and bacon on the table for her. "About that. I rode out at first light to check on your wagon." He poured coffee into a mug and slid it toward her. "Axle's broken clean through. Wheel's not just off, it's damaged beyond repair." Tabitha's heart sank. "Can it be fixed?" Quinn scratched the back of his neck. "Not easily. Nearest proper wheelwright is in Laramie, good 40 miles south. Parts would need to be ordered. Could take weeks." "Weeks?" Tabitha felt panic rising in her chest. Her meager funds wouldn't stretch to weeks of waiting in a strange town. "I can't possibly. I have a proposition," Quinn interrupted, sitting across from her. "I've been thinking on it all morning. My ranch is short-handed right now. My regular housekeeper, Mrs. Benson, left last month to care for her ailing sister in Denver. Place has been a bachelor's mess ever since." He gestured around the cabin, though Tabitha thought it looked perfectly tidy. "I could use help around here cooking, cleaning, mending. In exchange, I'll provide room and board for you and little Temperance, plus wages you can put toward your wagon repairs and journey." Tabitha stared at him, searching for any hint of impropriety in his expression, but found only straightforward honesty. "That's very generous, but I wouldn't want to be a charity case." "It's not charity if you're working," Quinn pointed out reasonably. "And I'm not offering out of pure altruism. Having decent meals again would be mighty nice." He smiled ruefully. "I'm a terrible cook, as you're about to discover from these hot cakes." Tabitha looked down at her plate. The hot cakes were oddly shaped and slightly burned around the edges, but the gesture itself touched her. How long had it been since someone had cooked for her? "What about your reputation?" she asked quietly. A widow staying alone with an unmarried man. Quinn's expression grew serious. "Folks around here know me. I've built a reputation for honest dealing. Besides, nearest neighbor is 5 miles away." He paused. "But if it makes you more comfortable, you can tell anyone who asks that you're my widowed cousin, come to help out temporarily. Tabitha considered her limited options. Continue west alone with a broken wagon and dwindling funds. Try to find work in the nearest town where she knew no one. Or accept this unexpected offer from a man who, despite being a stranger, had shown her nothing but kindness. "How long would you need my help?" she asked finally. "Spring roundup's coming. I'll be hiring extra hands then, including a cook for the bunkhouse. Say 6 weeks. By then, your wagon could be repaired, and you'd have some money to continue your journey. 6 weeks. Time to rest, recover, and replenish their resources before tackling the remainder of the journey to Oregon." Tabitha looked down at Temperance, who was happily playing with a wooden spoon Quinn had given her. "All right," she decided. "We accept your offer, Mr. Quinn. Thank you." Quinn nodded once, as if concluding a business transaction, but Tabitha didn't miss the relief that flashed across his face. "Good, that's good." He rose and reached for his hat. "I need to check the south pasture fence line today. Might be gone till late afternoon. Make yourself at home." After he'd left, Tabitha took stock of her new temporary residence. The cabin was clean but could use a woman's touch. The pantry was adequately stocked, though organized haphazardly. She found a basket of mending that had clearly been set aside and forgotten. "Well, Temperance," she said to her daughter, who was contentedly exploring a quilt Tabitha had spread on the floor, "it appears we have our work cut out for us." By the time Quinn returned that evening, Tabitha had swept and scrubbed the cabin from top to bottom, rearranged the pantry, and prepared a hearty beef and vegetable stew that filled the cabin with savory aromas. She'd even found time to start on the neglected mending. Quinn stopped short just inside the door, his eyes widening as he took in the transformation. The table was set with the cabin's mismatched but newly polished dinnerware, a small bunch of wildflowers placed in a jar as a centerpiece. "Something smells amazing," he said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. His eyes met Tabitha's, and something passed between them, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, that this was how a home should feel at the end of a long day. "Dinner's almost ready," Tabitha replied, suddenly self-conscious under his appreciative gaze. "There's warm water for washing up." Quinn cleared his throat. "Thank you." He crossed to where Temperance lay on her quilt, kneeling down beside her. "And how's the little lady today?" To Tabitha's continued amazement, Temperance gurgled happily and reached for Quinn with chubby hands. He laughed, a rich, deep sound that Tabitha realized she'd never heard before, and let the baby grasp his finger. "You're a natural with her," Tabitha observed, stirring the stew. Quinn's smile faded slightly. "Always figured I'd have a houseful by now." The admission seemed to surprise even him, and he quickly stood. "I'll just wash up." Over dinner, Quinn explained more about his ranch operations. He ran a modest herd of cattle and kept a few horses, managing most of the work himself except during roundup and branding. He'd come west after the war, using his savings to purchase the abandoned homestead and gradually building it into a viable operation. "What about you?" he asked. "What takes a young widow and baby all the way to Oregon alone?" Tabitha sighed, setting down her spoon. "James, my husband, had grand ideas about Oregon: free land, fertile soil, mild climate. He was a school teacher in Illinois, but he always dreamed of having his own farm." She smiled sadly. "He was so excited when we learned I was expecting, said our child deserved wide open spaces to grow in." "He sounds like a good man," Quinn said quietly. He was. Impractical sometimes, but kind and full of dreams. Tabitha blinked back unexpected tears. When he fell ill, it happened so quickly. One day he was fine, the next. She shook her head. "I could have turned back, I suppose, but something in me couldn't bear to give up on his dream, especially with Temperance coming." My cousin William has a farm outside Portland. He wrote that I'd be welcome there. Quinn studied her face. Takes courage to continue alone. Or foolishness, Tabitha admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. There have been many times I've questioned my decision. Well, Quinn said after a moment, you're welcome here for as long as you need. That night, after Tabitha had settled Temperance in a makeshift crib Quinn had fashioned from a wooden crate lined with soft blankets, she again tried to insist on taking the floor. You've been working all day, she argued. You need proper rest more than I do. Quinn's expression turned stubborn. My mother would haunt me till my dying day if I let a lady sleep on the floor while I took the bed. I'm perfectly comfortable where I am. Tabitha had to smile at his old-fashioned chivalry. Your mother raised you well. She tried her best, Quinn replied with a hint of humor. Good night, Tabitha. Good night, Quinn. Days fell into a comfortable routine. Quinn would rise before dawn to begin his ranch work, and Tabitha would prepare breakfast and a packed lunch for him. She spent her days caring for Temperance, keeping the cabin in order, preparing meals, and tending to the small kitchen garden that had been neglected since Mrs. Benson's departure. In the evenings, Quinn would return tired but satisfied, and they would share dinner and conversation. He proved to be surprisingly well-read for a rancher, and Tabitha discovered he kept a small bookshelf of classics that he worked his way through during the long winter months. After Temperance was asleep, they often sat by the fire, Quinn in his chair, Tabitha on the small settee reading or talking quietly. Sometimes Quinn would whittle while Tabitha mended, the comfortable silence between them more pleasant than awkward. On Sundays, Quinn didn't work beyond the essential chores of feeding livestock. The first Sunday of Tabitha's stay, he surprised her by hitching up his wagon after breakfast. Thought you and Temperance might like to see a bit more of the territory, he explained. There's a nice spot for a picnic by the creek, if you're amenable. The day was perfect, clear blue skies and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of spring wildflowers. Quinn drove them to a pretty meadow bisected by a clear, rushing creek. Tall cottonwoods provided dappled shade, and the grass was thick and lush. They spread a blanket near the water's edge, and Tabitha laid Temperance down to enjoy the fresh air and sunshine. The baby kicked her legs excitedly, fascinated by the play of light through the leaves overhead. She seems to be thriving here, Quinn observed, stretching out his long legs and leaning back on his elbows. She is, Tabitha agreed. I think we both are. The trail was difficult. She glanced at Quinn. Thank you for this. Not just today, but everything. Quinn looked momentarily flustered by her gratitude. It's nothing. It's not nothing to us, Tabitha insisted softly. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Quinn looked away first, clearing his throat. There's a family of beavers just upstream. Would you like to see their dam? As they walked along the creek bank, Quinn offered his arm to help Tabitha navigate the uneven ground while she carried Temperance. The simple contact his strong arm beneath her hand sent an unexpected warmth through her. How did you end up here? She asked, partly to distract herself from these unsettling feelings. You mentioned Missouri before. Quinn nodded. Born and raised outside of Springfield, family had a small farm. When the war came, I enlisted with the Union. Spent 4 years fighting, came home to find everything changed. His expression grew distant. Couldn't settle back into that life. Needed open spaces, I guess. Room to breathe. Tabitha noticed he didn't elaborate on what had changed, and she didn't press. Everyone who had lived through the war carried their own particular wounds. You've built something impressive here, she said instead. From nothing, Quinn's face softened. It's getting there. Another few years I'll have a proper herd, maybe build a bigger house. He glanced down at her, then quickly away. Always thought this place should have children running around it. The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Tabitha felt her cheeks warm and busied herself adjusting Temperance's bonnet. "Look," Quinn said suddenly, pointing ahead. "The Beaver Dam." The massive structure of carefully arranged branches and mud spanned the creek, creating a deep pool above it. As they watched, a sleek brown head appeared, regarding them cautiously before slapping its tail on the water's surface and disappearing. Temperance startled at the sound, then let out a delighted laugh that had both adults smiling. "She has your smile," Quinn observed. "Everyone says she looks just like James," Tabitha replied automatically. Quinn shook his head. "Maybe around the eyes, but that smile is all yours." The simple compliment touched Tabitha more deeply than it should have. How long had it been since someone had noticed something about her, rather than just seeing her as a widow or a mother? On the ride back to the ranch, with Temperance sleeping peacefully in her lap, Tabitha found herself studying Quinn's profile as he drove. The strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the confident set of his shoulders. When had she begun noticing these details? James had been gone less than 3 months. Was it disloyal to feel this strange, budding attraction to another man so soon? The thought troubled her, and she turned her attention to the passing landscape, trying to push away these confusing emotions. That night, as Tabitha prepared for bed, she caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman looking back at her seemed different from the exhausted, grief-stricken widow who had arrived at Quinn's barn. Her cheeks had more color, her eyes were clearer, and something like hope had returned to her expression. "What are you doing, Tabitha?" she whispered to her reflection. "This is temporary, 6 weeks, and then on to Oregon." But even as she told herself this, she wondered if the journey west was still what she truly wanted. The following weeks brought a deepening of the connection between Quinn and Tabitha, though neither openly acknowledged it. Quinn began bringing her small gifts, wildflowers he'd spotted while riding the range, a length of pretty blue ribbon from his infrequent trips to town, a wooden rattle he'd carved for Temperance during the evenings. For her part, Tabitha found herself taking special care with meals, noticing which dishes Quinn particularly enjoyed. She mended his shirts with tiny, perfect stitches and arranged wildflowers in jars around the cabin to brighten the space. When she discovered Quinn's mother's old recipe book tucked away in a drawer, she surprised him with his favorite childhood dessert, apple pandoti, which brought such a look of pleased surprise to his face that she felt her heart turn over. One evening, after they'd finished the dishes and Temperance was asleep, Quinn hesitated by the door, hat in hand. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch?" he asked. "The moon's nearly full. It's almost bright as day out there." Tabitha glanced toward the bedroom where Temperance slept. "I don't want to leave her alone." "We won't go far," Quinn promised. "Just up to the ridge behind the house. We can hear her if she cries." The night was indeed spectacular. The full moon bathed the landscape in silver light, and a blanket of stars stretched across the vast Wyoming sky. Quinn led Tabitha up a gentle slope behind the cabin to a flat outcropping of rock that offered a panoramic view of the ranch and the surrounding countryside. "It's beautiful," Tabitha breathed, taking in the moonlit valley below them, the silvery ribbon of creek winding through it. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Quinn admitted, standing beside her. "When I first bought this place, I'd come up here at the end of each day and just look out, planning what I'd build, where I'd run cattle, how I'd make it all work." "And you have," Tabitha said softly. "Made it work." Quinn glanced down at her. "Most of it, still missing some pieces." The weight of his gaze made Tabitha's pulse quicken. She knew what he meant, knew that the missing pieces had to do with family, with companionship, with love. The same things she had been missing since James died, perhaps even before, if she was truly honest with herself. "Quinn," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. "You don't have to go," he blurted out, his usual composure cracking. "To Oregon, I mean. You could stay here with me." Tabitha stared at him, heart hammering in her chest. "What are you saying?" Quinn took a deep breath. "I'm saying that these past weeks have been the happiest I can remember. Having you and Temperance here, it's made this place feel like a home, not just a ranch." He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Tabitha, with both of you, and I'm asking you to consider making this your home, permanently." Tabitha felt tears spring to her eyes. Part of her had been waiting for, hoping for these words, but now that they'd been spoken, she was afraid. "Quinn, my husband hasn't been gone 4 months. I know," he said gently. "And I'm not asking you to forget him or stop honoring his memory. I'm just asking for a chance. For time." "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered, though everything in her yearned to say yes. Quinn nodded, disappointment flashing in his eyes though he tried to hide it. "I understand. Just think about it. There's no rush, no pressure." He attempted a smile. "I'm not going anywhere." Back at the cabin, an awkward tension hung between them as they prepared for sleep. Tabitha checked on Temperance, then lingered in the bedroom doorway. "Quinn," he looked up from where he was arranging his bedding on the floor. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding. And for being patient." His expression softened. "Good night, Tabitha. Good night." But sleep eluded Tabitha that night as she thought about Quinn's words. Was it too soon to consider another marriage? What would James want for her and Temperance? The journey to Oregon suddenly seemed daunting rather than purposeful. And the thought of leaving Quinn and the home they'd begun to create together made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. The following days brought a new awareness between them. Quinn was careful not to press his suit, but Tabitha caught him watching her with longing when he thought she wouldn't notice. For her part, she found herself increasingly drawn to him, his quiet strength, his gentle way with Temperance, his unwavering integrity. Spring roundup arrived, bringing with it a flurry of activity. 3 cowhands Quinn had hired temporarily moved into the small bunkhouse on the property, and Tabitha found herself cooking for a crew instead of just the 2 of them. The long days of physical work left Quinn exhausted each evening, and their quiet conversations by the fire became less frequent. Tabitha missed them, missed him, even though he was right there. The emotional distance he maintained out of respect for her uncertainty was, she realized, more painful than his earlier honesty had been one afternoon. While the men were working the far pastures and Temperance was napping, Tabitha sat down and wrote 2 letters. The first was to her cousin William in Oregon, explaining her change in plans and promising to write again soon. The second was to the stage office in Laramie, inquiring about selling her damaged wagon and belongings, which Quinn had arranged to have brought to town. When Quinn returned that evening, later than usual and mud splattered from a day of working stubborn cattle through spring muck, Tabitha had dinner waiting and a decision made. "Rough day?" she asked, taking his hat and coat. Quinn nodded wearily. "Lost 2 calves in the North Creek. Water's running too high after those rains." He glanced around the cabin. "Where are the boys? I fed them earlier. Told them you'd been delayed and they shouldn't wait." Tabitha set a plate of food on the table. "Sit. Eat while it's hot." Quinn sank gratefully into his chair. "Thank you." He took a bite of the roast beef, closing his eyes briefly in appreciation. "This is wonderful." "I've been thinking," Tabitha said, sitting across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. "About what you said, about staying." Quinn went very still, his fork halfway to his mouth. Carefully, he set it down. "And I want to," she said simply. "Stay, I mean, with you if the offer still stands." The hope that bloomed on Quinn's face made her heart swell. "It does," he said hoarsely. "It absolutely does." "I need you to understand something," Tabitha continued. "I care deeply for James. I always will. He's Temperance's father, and he gave me great happiness." She took a deep breath. "But what I feel for you is different, new, and just as real." Quinn reached across the table to take her hands in his. "I would never ask you to forget him or compare what we might have to what you had with him. That was your past. I'm just hoping to be your future." Tabitha's eyes filled with tears. "I'd like that very much." Quinn's smile was radiant. "I don't have a ring yet. Wasn't planning on asking tonight, covered in mud and smelling like cattle." He grimaced, glancing down at his dirty clothes. "Not very romantic." Tabitha laughed, squeezing his hands. "I don't need romance. I need honesty and kindness and partnership. You've shown me all of those things. I want to do this properly," Quinn insisted. "Court you the way you deserve, not just jump from employer to husband." His eyes twinkled. "Though I'll warn you, my courting may involve a lot of ranch work and cattle talk." "I'd expect nothing less," Tabitha replied with a smile. From the bedroom came the sound of Temperance waking, her customary post-nap fussing growing louder. Tabitha began to rise, but Quinn stopped her. "May I?" he asked, a new note in his voice, the tentative eagerness of a man contemplating fatherhood. "Of course." Quinn returned a moment later with Temperance in his arms, the baby happily playing with the collar of his shirt. "I was thinking," he said, his voice soft as he looked down at the infant, "if we're going to be a family, she might want to call me Pa someday. Would that be all right with you?" The simple question, asked with such hope and uncertainty, made Tabitha's heart overflow with love for this man who had taken in two strangers and offered them not just shelter but a future. "I think," she said, rising to join them, "that would be absolutely perfect." True to his word, Quinn courted Tabitha properly throughout the remainder of spring and into early summer. Though they continued living under the same roof propriety, somewhat satisfied by the presence of the ranch hands during roundup, Quinn was scrupulously respectful of boundaries, still insisting on sleeping by the hearth while Tabitha and Temperance took the bedroom. Their first proper outing as a courting couple came in June, when Quinn arranged for Mrs. Peterson, the local preacher's wife, to watch Temperance while he took Tabitha to the small town of Elk Crossing for dinner and a community dance. Tabitha wore her best dress, a blue calico she'd carefully altered and embellished with some of the ribbon Quinn had given her. When she emerged from the bedroom, Quinn's stunned expression told her all she needed to know. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The townspeople received them with curious but mostly welcoming interest. Quinn was well respected in the community, and his introduction of Tabitha as "the woman I intend to marry" quelled most potential gossip before it could start. After dinner at the town's only restaurant, they joined other couples at the community hall for dancing. Quinn proved to be surprisingly graceful despite his size, guiding Tabitha confidently through waltzes and reels. During a break in the music, he led her outside for some air. The summer evening was warm, stars just beginning to appear in the deepening blue sky. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Quinn asked, a hint of anxiety in his voice. "Very much," Tabitha assured him, "though I'm a bit rusty at dancing." "You're perfect," Quinn replied, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I have something for you. Had to order it special from Cheyenne." He tipped the contents into his palm, a delicate gold ring set with a small but brilliant diamond. Tabitha's breath caught. "Quinn, "I know we've already decided," he said, suddenly seeming nervous, "but I wanted to do this right." He took her hand. "Tabitha Lawson, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Of making a family with me, raising Temperance together, and perhaps, God willing, adding to our family in the years to come?" Tears of happiness blurred Tabitha's vision. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for their first kiss, gentle and reverent at first, then deepening as Tabitha responded with all the love that had been growing in her heart these past months. When they finally drew apart, both a little breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I'll spend every day trying to make you happy," he promised. "You already do," Tabitha replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him again. They were married 4 weeks later in the small white church in Elk Crossing, with Temperance, now 9 months old, contentedly playing with Quinn's watch chain throughout the ceremony. The ranch hands stood as witnesses, along with a few neighbors and townspeople who had come to know and respect the couple. Tabitha wore a new dress of ivory muslin, ordered from Laramie with some of the money from the sale of her wagon. Quinn had protested when she'd mentioned using those funds, insisting he would buy her wedding clothes, but Tabitha had been firm. "I'm coming to this marriage as your equal partner," she'd told him, "not as someone to be taken care of." Quinn had smiled and conceded the point, though he'd still surprised her with a pearl necklace that had belonged to his mother. After a simple reception at the church hall, they returned to the ranch, their home, as husband and wife. The hands had tactfully arranged to be elsewhere for the evening, giving the newlyweds privacy for their first night together. As they approached the cabin, Quinn suddenly stopped the wagon. "Wait here," he said, jumping down. Before Tabitha could question him, he had lifted her from the seat, Temperance and all, and carried them both across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Harrington," he said, setting her gently on her feet and kissing her softly. "That has a nice sound to it," Tabitha replied, smiling up at him. Later that evening, after Temperance had been put to bed in the new cradle Quinn had crafted as a wedding present, husband and wife stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Are you happy?" Quinn asked, his arm around Tabitha's waist. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," she answered honestly, leaning into his embrace. "When James died, I thought that part of my life was over. I was just surviving for Temperance's sake." She turned to face him. "You gave me back the ability to hope, to dream, to love." Quinn's eyes, so often guarded, were transparent with emotion. "I was so alone before you came," he admitted, building something with no one to share it with. His hand came up to cup her cheek. "You made this place a home, Tabitha. You and Temperance." As the last light faded from the sky, they went inside together, no longer a lonely rancher and a widowed traveler, but a family beginning a new chapter in a home built on love, respect, and the kind of courage that allows hearts to start anew. Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows of the large farmhouse that had replaced Quinn's original cabin 3 years earlier. Tabitha smiled as she kneaded bread dough, pausing to look out at the yard where Quinn was pretending to be a horse, 5-year-old Temperance on his back, and their 3-year-old son, Thomas, attempting to climb up his leg. "Papa, faster." Temperance commanded, her dark curls so like her mother's bouncing as Quinn trotted around the yard. "Me too," Thomas insisted, finally succeeding in scrambling up to join his sister. Quinn groaned dramatically. "2 riders. This old horse might collapse." Their youngest, 1-year-old Quincy, watched the proceedings from his blanket on the porch, giggling and clapping his pudgy hands. The ranch had prospered along with the family. Quinn's herd had doubled, and they'd added sheep the previous year, Tabitha's idea, which had proven profitable when the wool sold for excellent prices. The original bunkhouse had been expanded to accommodate the 4 permanent hands they now employed, and a proper barn had replaced the old structure where Tabitha and Temperance had first sought shelter on that stormy night. Quinn caught sight of Tabitha watching from the window and grinned, his face still boyishly handsome despite the few strands of silver now appearing in his dark hair. He said something to the children, then headed toward the house while they ran off to play with the gentle old collie that had adopted the family 2 summers ago. "What are you smiling about, Mrs. Harrington?" Quinn asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just counting my blessings," Tabitha replied, leaning back against his solid chest. "They're numerous." Quinn pressed a kiss to the side of her neck. "As are mine." His hand drifted to rest on her slightly rounded stomach where their 4th child was just beginning to show, and growing more numerous by the day. Tabitha turned in his arms, flour-dusted hands coming to rest on his shoulders. "Did you ever imagine that night when you found me in your barn that we'd be here 5 years later?" Quinn's eyes grew thoughtful. "Not specifically. But I knew even then that there was something special about the woman sleeping in my barn with her baby." His mouth quirked in a smile. "That's why this cowboy said, 'You take the bed, I'll take the floor.' Your mother raised you right," Tabitha teased, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Indeed she did," Quinn agreed. "And speaking of mothers raising children right," he nodded toward the window, where Temperance was now helping Thomas build what appeared to be a fort out of sticks. "You're doing an amazing job with them." "We're doing it together," Tabitha corrected gently. "Just as we promised." Outside, Temperance looked up and waved when she spotted her parents watching. Tabitha and Quinn waved back, their hands finding each other's naturally, fingers intertwining in the familiar, comfortable way of 2 people whose lives had become wonderfully, permanently entwined. "Together," Quinn agreed, squeezing her hand. "Always." And as the Wyoming sun shone down on their thriving ranch and growing family, Tabitha knew that the unexpected detour that had brought her to Quinn's barn that stormy night had been no accident, but the beginning of the journey she was always meant to take, not west to Oregon, but home to the heart that had been waiting for hers all along.